Have you ever felt like the more you think deeply, the more isolated you become? That the more you understand, the less people want to listen? It's not just in your head. Society has always feared deep thinkers, not because they are wrong, but because they see what others don't want to. History proves it. From Socrates to Nietzsche, from Galileo to Tesla, brilliant minds have been ridiculed, silenced, or ignored, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they made people uncomfortable. Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers, believed that intelligence itself was a curse, one that isolates those who see the world too clearly. But why does this happen? Why does society resist those who think differently? The answer lies deep within human psychology. Think about this. When you stand next to someone who is physically strong, you don't necessarily feel weak. You admire their strength. When you meet someone who is rich, you might envy them, but you don't feel personally attacked. But when you encounter someone who is intellectually superior, something strange happens. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. A deep thinker does not just introduce new ideas, they reflect back the limitations of those around them. And people don't forgive that easily. The mere presence of someone who thinks deeply can make others feel inadequate, even if the deep thinker says nothing at all. But why does this happen? Why does intelligence, more than any other kind of superiority, provoke such discomfort? To understand this, let's consider how our minds process different forms of superiority. When someone is physically stronger, we might see them as a leader or protector. When someone is wealthier, we might admire their success or aspire to achieve something similar. These qualities, strength, wealth, beauty, are external. We recognize them, but they don't necessarily challenge our core self-perception. However, intelligence operates differently. Unlike physical strength or material wealth, intelligence is deeply tied to identity. We define ourselves by our thoughts, our beliefs, our understanding of the world. When we meet someone who thinks on a deeper level, someone who questions what we take for granted, it can feel like a direct attack on our sense of self. Instead of admiring intelligence, many people subconsciously resist it, not because the deep thinker is arrogant or dismissive, but because their very presence forces others to confront their own limitations. This is why, throughout history, deep thinkers have been pushed to the fringes of society. Their insights don't just challenge ideas, they challenge egos. And human beings by nature will do almost anything to protect their ego from discomfort. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever tried to introduce a deep or complex idea in a casual conversation, only to be met with blank stares or awkward silence? Have you ever noticed how people quickly shift topics when discussions move beyond surface-level chatter? This is not just coincidence, it's a defense mechanism. When people encounter a deep thinker, their mind goes into self-preservation mode. Instead of being curious, they resist. Instead of engaging, they dismiss. This is why intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries often find themselves isolated, not because they want to be alone, but because society pushes them away. Interestingly, studies show that confidence is often valued more than intelligence in social settings. People are naturally drawn to those who project certainty, even if their ideas are shallow. This is why charismatic but simplistic thinkers gain more influence than deep thinkers who speak with nuance. History is full of examples: populist leaders, motivational speakers, and viral influencers who thrive by telling people what they want to hear, rather than challenging them to think critically. Meanwhile, those who question widely accepted beliefs often struggle to find a broad audience. This is the paradox of intelligence. The more someone seeks truth, the more they become disconnected from the majority. The mirror effect does not just reflect society's limitations, it highlights why society resists change in the first place. But the question remains: if intelligence is so threatening, is there scientific proof that people actually fear it? Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when people feel intellectually inferior, their brain's amygdala, the region responsible for fear and threat detection, becomes highly active. In simple terms, deep thinking is not just intimidating, it triggers a primal survival response, similar to what we feel when facing danger. But why does intelligence activate the same fear circuits as a physical threat? The answer lies in how human brains evolved. For most of human history, survival depended not on being the smartest person in the room, but on being accepted by the group. Our ancestors thrived in tribes where social harmony meant safety. Being rejected by the group could mean death, as isolation led to vulnerability. This is why human brains are wired for social acceptance over intellectual pursuit. When someone highly intelligent enters a social setting, they unknowingly disrupt the tribal balance. Their presence challenges existing ideas, social norms, and group dynamics. This triggers the brain's defense mechanism, as if facing a potential enemy rather than just a deeper thinker. This is why many deep thinkers feel isolated, not because they lack social skills, but because their intelligence makes them stand out in a world that values fitting in over standing out. A 2021 study at Stanford University uncovered something even more shocking. The rejection of deep thinkers is context-dependent. When people interact with an intellectual one-on-one, they feel less threatened. But in group settings, the threat response spikes dramatically. Why? Because social status becomes more important in groups. People don't just react to intelligence itself. They react to how others perceive them in comparison. If someone feels outshined by a deep thinker, they instinctively try to undermine or exclude them to protect their social standing. This explains why deep thinkers often find genuine conversations in private settings, but struggle to engage in large social environments. Psychologists have identified several cognitive biases that further explain why intelligence is often met with resistance. The Dunning-Kruger effect. People with low ability often overestimate their intelligence, while highly intelligent people tend to doubt themselves. This creates friction. Those who know little often believe they know more than they do, leading them to dismiss deeper thinkers. Status quo. Bias. The human brain prefers familiar ideas over new, complex truths. Intelligence often introduces disruptive thoughts, which make people uncomfortable. The backfire effect. When people are confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs, they don't change their minds. They double down on their existing views. Deep thinkers often face this reaction when they introduce challenging ideas. In the digital age, social media has amplified this rejection of intelligence. Algorithms prioritize engagement over depth, meaning that controversial, emotionally charged content spreads faster than thoughtful, well-reasoned arguments. Take a look at the most viral content. Simple, catchy, and often misleading sound bites outperform nuanced discussions. The more intellectual someone is, the harder it is for them to compress deep ideas into bite-sized, viral-friendly content. As a result, society increasingly favors entertainment over enlightenment, making it even more challenging for deep thinkers to find widespread acceptance. So, what does this mean for deep thinkers? The rejection of intelligence isn't just social. It's biological, psychological, and cultural. It is built into human nature, reinforced by group dynamics, and magnified by modern technology. This doesn't mean deep thinkers should stop sharing their ideas, but it does mean that they need to understand the forces working against them. But if society resists intelligence, what does it actually embrace? The answer lies in comfort, a world where predictability is preferred over truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers in history, believed that intelligence is not a gift, but a curse. Unlike other thinkers who saw intelligence as the key to success, Schopenhauer argued that the smarter a person is, the more they will struggle to connect with society. But why? What makes intelligence such a burden? Schopenhauer's philosophy was built on a concept he called the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all human behavior. According to him, most people live their lives controlled by the will to live, meaning they seek pleasure, comfort, and survival above all else. However, highly intelligent people operate differently. Instead of blindly following instincts, they develop the will to truth, an insatiable desire to understand reality, even if it leads to discomfort. Regular people seek pleasure and avoid difficult truths. Deep thinkers seek truth, even if it leads to pain and isolation. This creates a fundamental disconnect between intellectuals and the rest of society. Where most people find meaning in relationships, entertainment, and routine pleasures, deep thinkers often feel disillusioned with these things, seeing them as distractions from deeper existential questions. Schopenhauer believed that the more a person understands human nature, the harder it is for them to relate to others. They see through lies and deception. Most social interactions involve small talk, status games, and polite dishonesty. And deep thinkers who value truth over appearance often struggle to participate in this. They crave depth, but society favors simplicity. Most people prefer surface-level conversations, while deep thinkers crave meaningful discussions. This makes it difficult for them to engage in everyday interactions without feeling bored or disconnected. They recognize the futility of human desires. Schopenhauer saw desire and ambition as illusions. He believed that most people chase money, power, and relationships. But deep thinkers often question the very purpose of these pursuits. This makes them appear distant or indifferent to what excites the majority. This is why intelligent people often feel misunderstood, alienated, or even resented. Their mere presence forces others to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, and most people would rather avoid that. Schopenhauer compared intelligence to a heightened sense of awareness, a blessing that feels more like a curse. He wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial." His reasoning was simple. The more you understand, the less you can ignore. The more aware you are of the world's flaws, the harder it is to find happiness in it. The more you think deeply, the lonelier you become. For Schopenhauer, happiness and intelligence were inversely related. He believed that ignorance, not wisdom, was the true key to happiness. This is why deep thinkers throughout history, Nietzsche, Pascal, Kafka, have often struggled with depression, existential crises, and social isolation. Schopenhauer did not just diagnose the problem, he also offered solutions. He believed that, while intelligence leads to loneliness, there are ways for deep thinkers to cope with their isolation. Embrace solitude. Schopenhauer saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a privilege. He believed that deep thinkers should use their alone time for intellectual and creative pursuits rather than seeking validation from society. Find like-minded individuals. Instead of trying to fit into mainstream society, Schopenhauer advised intelligent people to seek out those who think like them, whether through books, philosophy, or exclusive intellectual circles. Engage with the world wisely. He warned against blindly sharing deep insights with people who weren't ready for them. Instead, he suggested that thinkers observe society, learn its patterns, and choose their words carefully. His teachings serve as a guide for modern deep thinkers struggling with social rejection. While intelligence may lead to loneliness, it also grants freedom, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of life. Schopenhauer saw intelligence as a double-edged sword, a source of both power and pain. While it allows one to see reality more clearly, it also distances them from those who prefer illusions. In the end, Schopenhauer's philosophy confirms what we already suspect. Society doesn't fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence reveals. Deep thinkers aren't rejected because they are wrong. They are rejected because they are right too soon. So if you've ever felt alone in your thoughts, know this: you are not broken. You are simply seeing the world for what it really is. But does this mean deep thinkers are doomed to isolation? Or are there ways to navigate society while preserving intellectual depth? The truth is, society isn't built to embrace deep thinkers. It's built to maintain stability. Most people prefer comfort over truth. That's why shallow conversations, simple ideas, and repetitive content dominate social spaces. But why is comfort prioritized over intellectual depth? Why does society resist change, even when that change leads to progress? The answer lies in how human psychology is wired and how institutions shape our thinking from an early age. At its core, the human brain craves certainty and predictability. Evolution has programmed us to avoid mental discomfort, a phenomenon psychologists call cognitive ease. Cognitive ease. The brain prefers simple, familiar information because it requires less mental energy to process. When an idea is complicated, nuanced, or unfamiliar, the brain perceives it as difficult and potentially dangerous. System justification. Theory. This explains why people defend the status quo, even when it works against them. Instead of questioning authority or outdated beliefs, most people prefer to rationalize them because change feels too uncertain. Groupthink. People would rather conform to widely accepted beliefs than risk social rejection by challenging them. This is why the majority tends to reject intellectual dissent, even when it's based on truth. This deep psychological preference for comfort over complexity is why intellectuals, philosophers, and scientists often struggle to gain mass acceptance, especially during their lifetimes. Take a look at today's digital world. Who gets the most attention on social media? Not the intellectuals, but those who can reduce complex ideas into viral, feel-good sound bites. Thought-provoking discussions struggle to gain traction because depth takes time, while viral content is instant, emotional, and easy to digest. Algorithms reward engagement, and nothing engages people more than controversy, outrage, or humor, all of which often sideline rational intellectual discourse. Echo chambers develop, where people are exposed only to information that reinforces their existing beliefs, making them resistant to new perspectives. In this environment, deep thinkers who challenge the mainstream narrative often find themselves ignored, misunderstood, or even attacked. This rejection of deep thinking doesn't just happen online. It begins in the very institutions that shape our minds: schools and workplaces, education system. Schools claim to value intelligence, but in reality, they reward obedience over independent thought. Students who memorize and regurgitate information succeed, while those who question or challenge authority are often labeled as troublemakers. Workplaces. The corporate world doesn't favor the most intelligent or innovative employees. It favors those who fit the culture and maintain the existing power structure. Politics. Leaders who make bold, unpopular statements rooted in logic often lose to those who simply tell people what they want to hear. This explains why the most celebrated intellectuals in history were outcasts during their lifetimes. Their ideas were seen as disruptive rather than valuable. Society claims to value intelligence, innovation, and critical thinking. But in reality, it only celebrates these qualities after they are safe and widely accepted. Consider these examples. Galileo was imprisoned for his discoveries, but today, we praise him as a scientific genius. Van Gogh died in poverty, yet his paintings are worth millions now. Nikola Tesla revolutionized energy, but lived and died in obscurity. Society does not embrace intelligence when it challenges the norm. It only celebrates it in hindsight, once it's no longer threatening. So, if deep thinkers struggle to be accepted, what can they do? If you have ever felt misunderstood for thinking deeply, you are in good company. Throughout history, some of the most brilliant minds were not celebrated during their lifetimes. They were ridiculed, persecuted, or ignored. Their ideas were seen as dangerous, disruptive, or simply too difficult for society to accept at the time. These thinkers had one thing in common: they were ahead of their time. And because of that, they suffered for their wisdom. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, spent his life questioning commonly held beliefs. He challenged people to think critically, to examine their own ideas, and to embrace logic over blind tradition. But instead of being celebrated for his wisdom, he was put on trial for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. His real crime? Encouraging people to think for themselves. Despite being given the option to escape, Socrates chose to drink poison rather than abandon his principles. His famous words before his death: "The unexamined life is not worth living." His death sent a clear message. Society fears those who challenge its core beliefs. Galileo's only crime was discovering the truth. When he proved that the earth revolves around the sun, he shattered centuries of religious dogma. The church, which held power through controlling knowledge, branded him a heretic. He was forced to publicly deny his own discoveries under threat of torture. Even though we now recognize him as one of history's greatest scientists, during his lifetime, he lived under house arrest. His work banned for nearly a century. Galileo's story proves that even the most undeniable truths will be rejected if they threaten the existing power structure. Nietzsche's work was considered too radical, too unsettling. He argued that traditional morality was flawed, that society was built on comforting lies, and that true strength came from creating one's own values. At the time, these ideas were too much for people to handle. He was dismissed as insane, his works ignored or misunderstood. Yet today, Nietzsche's philosophy influences psychology, literature, and existentialism. His ideas on power, will, and morality now shape modern philosophy, proving that society often rejects deep thinkers in the present, only to embrace them in the future. Tesla was a visionary. He dreamed of free energy for the world, wireless electricity, and technological advancements that could have revolutionized human civilization. But society, and more specifically those in power, saw his ideas as a threat. Industrialists like Thomas Edison and J.P. Morgan profited from selling electricity, so Tesla's idea of free energy was shut down. Despite his genius, Tesla died alone in a small hotel room, forgotten and broke, while others built fortunes using his stolen ideas. His life is a perfect example of how society often rewards businessmen and marketers over true visionaries. Alan Turing's work in cryptography helped end World War II. His code-breaking skills saved millions of lives. His theories in computing became the foundation of modern artificial intelligence. Yet, instead of being honored, he was persecuted for his personal life. In 1952, he was chemically castrated for being gay, a decision that led to his tragic suicide at just 41 years old. Today, Turing is recognized as a hero. But in his time, society discarded him despite his incredible contributions. While most historical deep thinkers were men, Hypatia of Alexandria was a rare exception, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer who challenged the male-dominated intellectual world of ancient Rome. She taught scientific reasoning and rational thought, which put her at odds with the religious authorities. In the year 415 AD, a mob of religious extremists brutally murdered her, seeing her as a threat to their power. Her story highlights a crucial pattern in history. Intellectual progress is often met with violent resistance. Each of these thinkers shared the same fate. They introduced ideas that were too advanced for their time. They were rejected, ridiculed, or punished while they were alive. Their ideas later became the foundation of human progress. Society doesn't fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence represents: change. And that raises an important question. If history proves that society resists deep thinkers, what can you do if you're one of them? Does this mean deep thinkers are doomed to loneliness? Not at all. It just means you need to understand how to navigate society wisely. Not every place or person is ready for deep conversations. Save your most profound thoughts for people who truly appreciate them. You don't need millions of people to understand you, just the right ones. Seek out those who think like you, whether in books, online communities, or intellectual circles. The greatest thinkers in history found ways to make deep ideas accessible. Einstein said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Learn to communicate your depth without overwhelming others." Schopenhauer once said, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." Deep thinkers see the world differently, and that will always make some people uncomfortable. But that does not mean you should stop thinking deeply. Society needs deep thinkers. It just doesn't always know how to embrace them. So, if you have ever felt like an outsider for your thoughts, remember this: you are not alone. And while society may fear deep thinkers, it is deep thinkers who push humanity forward. If this video resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced rejection for thinking deeply? Let's start a conversation. And if you want to explore more insights from history's greatest minds, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Imagine this. You are standing in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart is pounding. Every word feels like a weapon, every sentence a battle. You carefully craft your next response, determined to prove that you are right. But the other person? They are doing the exact same thing. Neither of you is listening, only waiting for a chance to strike back. And then, Nietzsche steps in. He does not pick a side. He does not tell you what to say. Instead, he whispers something unsettling in your ear. You have already lost. What does he mean? You are fighting, you are defending yourself, you are standing your ground. How could that mean defeat? Because, according to Nietzsche, the moment you engage in this kind of battle, you have already surrendered your power. True strength, he argues, does not come from fighting to be right. It comes from something far more unexpected. So, what is this hidden power? And why does silence often speak louder than words? Let's dive into Nietzsche's philosophy and uncover the silent trick that gives you real power. Most people believe that power comes from winning arguments, proving others wrong, and dominating conversations. But Friedrich Nietzsche had a completely different view. He believed power was not in words. It was in control. Why do people argue? If you've ever found yourself in a heated argument, you know how quickly things escalate. But have you ever stopped to ask, why do people argue in the first place? Nietzsche would say that most arguments are not about truth, but about deeper psychological needs. Ego protection. People argue because their identity is at stake. Accepting they are wrong feels like losing a part of themselves. The mind resists this at all costs. Power struggles. Many debates are not about facts or logic. They are battles for dominance. Who speaks last? Who controls the tone? Who makes the other back down? Herd mentality, social validation. Some people argue not because they believe in their point, but because they want to be seen as smart, confident, or strong by their peers. Nietzsche saw these behaviors as signs of weakness. He believed that those who react emotionally to arguments are being controlled. The moment you let someone provoke you, you have already lost. Nietzsche's will to power and the Übermensch. Nietzsche's famous idea of will to power is often misunderstood. It's not about brute force. It's about the ability to impose your will on reality. This does not always require words. Sometimes, the strongest power is the ability not to react. And this is where the Übermensch comes in, the ideal superior individual in Nietzsche's philosophy. The Übermensch is not emotionally reactive like the average person. He does not argue just to win or prove a point. Instead, he chooses when to engage and when to remain silent. Because power is not about talking, it's about controlling the entire interaction. Example, imagine a meeting where two people are arguing. One is loud, aggressive, trying to prove they are right. The other, calm, collected. They listen more than they speak. They don't get dragged into emotional back and forths, but when they finally say something, it's powerful, well-timed, and shifts the entire conversation. Who really holds the power here? Nietzsche would argue that the person who stays in control, who doesn't react emotionally, always wins in the long run. Why strategic silence is more powerful than winning arguments. Silence, when used correctly, is not weakness, it's a psychological weapon. It forces the other person to reveal more about themselves. It makes them feel uncertain, making them second-guess their own words. It creates tension, and tension makes people uncomfortable, which gives you control. The Übermensch doesn't just stay silent in arguments. He uses silence as a tool, a pause, a moment of restraint, a well-timed response that flips the conversation in his favor. This is why Nietzsche's version of power is not about fighting. It's about mastering the battlefield before the fight even begins. Silence is not just the absence of words. It's a tool, a weapon wielded by history's greatest minds to dominate battles of intellect, business, and war. Nietzsche's idea of power was not about loud arguments or winning debates. It was about influence, control, and strategic restraint. Let's explore three legendary figures who embodied this principle: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. Socrates' method: winning without fighting. Socrates never engaged in traditional arguments. He did not yell, attack, or try to force his point. Instead, he used a technique so powerful that it still shapes intellectual discussions today: the Socratic method, a way of questioning that made people expose their own contradictions. Imagine this: a proud Athenian politician claims to be the wisest man in the city. Instead of outright challenging him, Socrates simply asks, "What is wisdom?" The man, eager to prove his intellect, begins defining it. But with every question Socrates asks, the definition falls apart. The politician, once so confident, now stumbles over his own words, realizing he has no true grasp of the very concept he boasts about. Socrates did not need to tell people they were wrong. He made them realize it themselves. He understood a fundamental truth. People don't accept what you tell them. They only accept what they discover on their own. This is the essence of silent power. Instead of engaging in pointless shouting matches, ask questions that lead people to question themselves. Steve Jobs' strategy: the art of controlled conflict. If Socrates dominated through questioning, Steve Jobs dominated through strategic persuasion. He did not avoid arguments, he orchestrated them. His leadership at Apple was not about debating every small detail. It was about controlling the larger conversation. Jobs had a simple yet powerful principle: you don't waste energy on unnecessary fights, but when something truly matters, you go all in. One famous example was his battle with his own team over the iPhone's design. Engineers wanted physical buttons. Jobs wanted a full touch screen. Instead of arguing endlessly, he led them to see his vision. He let them debate, let them express their concerns, until they realized through his guidance that a touchscreen device was not just possible, it was inevitable. He did not tell people what to think. He made them believe it was their idea all along. Most people argue out of ego, to prove they are right, but Jobs argued with a purpose, to win people over, not to prove a point. And that's the key. If your words don't move people toward action, they are just noise. Miyamoto Musashi, the silent samurai, who won before the fight began. Now let's go beyond philosophy and business, to the battlefield. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, understood a simple truth. The best way to win a fight is to never draw your sword. Musashi won over 60 duels, but not just through physical skill. His greatest victories were psychological. He played mind games, unsettling his opponents before the battle even began. One famous example, his duel against Sasaki Kojiro. Kojiro was a master swordsman, known for his deadly speed. But Musashi didn't challenge him head-on. Instead, he showed up hours late to the duel, making Kojiro furious. By the time Kojiro finally faced him, he was so blinded by anger that he made mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him with ease. Musashi knew that if your enemy is emotional, they are already weak. Nietzsche's philosophy aligns perfectly with this. The Übermensch does not react. He controls the reaction of others. Musashi proved that silence, patience, and psychological dominance are often more powerful than brute force. The common thread: power through strategic silence. What do Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi all have in common? They never wasted energy on useless arguments. They did not react. They dictated the terms of engagement. They understood that true power is not in words, it's in influence. The next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I reacting emotionally or am I controlling the situation? Because true power is silent. Why do we argue? Why do we feel the need to prove ourselves right, to fight back, to defend our ideas even when the argument is going nowhere? Most people believe that arguments are about truth. They are not. Arguments are about power. The more you argue, the more you reveal about yourself, your insecurities, your emotional triggers, and most importantly, the fact that someone else is controlling your reaction. Nietzsche understood this deeply. His concept of will to power was not just about physical dominance. It was about controlling yourself so well that others fall into your influence without even realizing it. And modern psychology proves just how accurate Nietzsche was. Why do people get trapped in arguments? Arguments are not logical, they are psychological. When we argue, we believe we are standing up for our beliefs. In reality, we are often just reacting to deep-rooted psychological triggers. Let's break it down. 1. Cognitive biases. Your brain wants to win, not learn. Our brains are wired with biases that make us terrible at arguing rationally. The biggest culprits? Confirmation. Bias. We only look for information that supports what we already believe. Backfire effect. When someone challenges our beliefs, we don't change our minds. We double down. Dunning-Kruger effect. The less we know about something, the more confident we are in our opinions. These biases make most arguments pointless. No one actually listens. Instead, they just wait for their turn to speak. Nietzsche's Übermensch avoids this trap. He listens, observes, and chooses whether the conversation is worth engaging in. 2. Emotional triggers. Why we take arguments. Personally, have you ever wondered why some arguments make you furious while others don't bother you at all? That's because we don't argue over logic, we argue over identity. When someone disagrees with us on a deep level, it feels like a personal attack. That's why debates about politics, religion, or philosophy turn ugly so fast. Because people don't just feel like their ideas are being challenged, they feel like they themselves are being attacked. This is why the most powerful people in history never argue emotionally. If someone can make you emotional, they control you. The Übermensch does not fall for this trap. He does not react. He observes, analyzes, and then decides whether or not to respond. 3. The need for validation. The real reason people argue. At the core of most arguments isn't truth, it's ego. People don't just want to be right, they want to be seen as right. Nietzsche understood that most humans seek validation from the herd. They argue not to find truth, but to gain approval. But the Übermensch does not need validation. He creates his own truth. Think about the most influential figures in history. Did they waste time arguing with critics? Number. They focused on their vision, ignored distractions, and let their actions speak louder than words. Nietzsche was ahead of his time. His insights on power, control, and silence align perfectly with modern psychological research. Let's break it down. 1. Power dynamics in social interactions. Social psychologists have found that the most powerful people in any group are not the ones who talk the most, but the ones who control the flow of conversation. They don't interrupt, they don't over-explain. They choose their words carefully, making people hang on to every sentence. This is why powerful leaders rarely raise their voices. They don't need to. When they speak, people listen, because they have already created an aura of authority through their silence. 2. The role of self-restraint in persuasion. Research in behavioral psychology shows that people who stay calm and composed in arguments are far more persuasive than those who get emotional. Why? Because humans are wired to see calmness as confidence. Nietzsche believed that true power comes from self-mastery. The Übermensch is not a slave to his emotions. He does not react, he decides, and that makes him untouchable. The real reason Nietzsche saw silence as power was not because he wanted people to avoid conflict. It was because he knew that the one who controls his own reaction controls the entire conversation. Let's put this into perspective. If someone insults you and you react, you have lost. If someone challenges you and you feel the urge to defend yourself, you have lost. If you get pulled into an argument just to prove you are right, you have lost. But if you observe, stay calm, and respond only when it serves your purpose, you have already won. Nietzsche's philosophy is not about staying silent forever. It's about choosing your battles. Ask yourself, am I speaking because I want to, or because I feel forced to? Am I reacting emotionally, or am I in control of my response? Is this argument worth my energy, or am I just feeding my ego? Because true power, as Nietzsche saw it, is not in words. It's in the silence before the words, the pause that makes others lean in, the decision to speak only when it matters. And that is the silent trick that gives you power. Silence is powerful, but does that mean you should always stay silent? Silence can be a weapon, but wielding it indiscriminately can be just as foolish as speaking without thought. If silence were the only path to power, then history's greatest minds, philosophers, revolutionaries, and visionaries, would have remained unheard. Yet, they spoke. Because real power is not in avoiding conflict. It's in knowing when to engage and when to hold back. Nietzsche's will to power, conflict as a path to mastery. Many misinterpret Nietzsche as an advocate of withdrawal, of detachment from the struggle, but his concept of the will to power was never about passivity. It was about domination, growth, and self-overcoming. Power is not in silence alone, it's in control. Avoiding conflict completely is not wisdom, it's fear disguised as restraint. Mastering conflict does not mean rejecting it, it means using it as a tool. Nietzsche's Übermensch does not argue over petty things, but he also does not run from necessary battles. He knows that conflict can be a crucible for strength. Why do most people avoid arguments? Because they're uncomfortable. But Nietzsche understood that discomfort breeds strength. He saw struggle as necessary, not as something to be avoided. Weak thinkers avoid challenges. Strong thinkers welcome them because challenge forces refinement. Imagine a warrior who never enters battle. A blade that is never tested against steel will never be battle-ready. In the same way, a mind that is never challenged remains dull, weak, and fragile. Without intellectual conflict, your ideas remain untested. Without struggle, your convictions remain hollow. Think about the boldest thinkers in history. Galileo was condemned for challenging the church's view of the universe. Socrates was sentenced to death for questioning conventional beliefs. Nietzsche himself was dismissed as a madman in his time, yet today, his ideas shape modern thought. Their power did not come from silence. It came from choosing their battles wisely and engaging in necessary conflict. There's a critical difference between arguing to prove you are right and arguing to shape reality. Nietzsche understood this. The greatest leaders, philosophers, and visionaries don't avoid arguments. They use them strategically. Consider. Socrates did not attack others' beliefs directly. He questioned them until they collapsed on their own. Nietzsche's writings were designed to challenge, provoke, and shake people out of their mental complacency. Steve Jobs didn't avoid conflict. He used it to push people beyond their limits and drive innovation. Powerful people don't argue for validation. They argue for transformation. They don't fight to win debates. They fight to shape the world in their vision. The Ubermensch does not argue to satisfy his ego. He argues with purpose. Here's when you should engage: when the argument sharpens your thinking, when it reveals deeper truths, when it pushes you or others to grow, when it shifts power in your favor. But here's when you should not: when you are just defending your ego, when the other person is not open to change, when it's a pointless emotional battle, when your silence itself is a power move. Arguing without strategy is weakness. Arguing with precision is power. Nietzsche was not afraid of arguments. He embraced conflict, but on his own terms. If an argument makes you weaker, avoid it. If an argument makes you stronger, engage with it. If an argument is just a distraction, ignore it completely. If conflict makes you stronger, it's not something to be avoided. It's something to be mastered. True power lies not in silence alone, but in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. If you had the choice between never arguing again or mastering the art of influence through conflict, which would make you more powerful? Imagine this. You wake up one day and a voice tells you, you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. Every sentence, every word now carries weight. Would you waste them in a heated argument? Would you spend them trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't even listening? Or would you choose them carefully, like a warrior sharpening his final blade before battle? This is where real power lies. Nietzsche understood something that most people ignore. Words are currency. The more you spend them carelessly, the less valuable they become. Now, picture yourself in an argument. Your heart races. Your mind floods with comebacks, defenses, and points you're dying to prove. But stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, who truly holds the power here? The one frantically trying to prove himself, or the one who knows when to stay silent? Because silence is not weakness, it's strategy, it's control, it's the art of making others question themselves without you ever needing to convince them. So, here's the challenge. The next time you're about to argue, pause. Instead of reacting immediately, observe. Watch how the other person reveals their weaknesses. See how they show you their fears, their insecurities, just by the way they speak. And then, when the time is right, choose your words like a master, or don't speak at all. Because true power is silent. Want more insights on philosophy, psychology, and power? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a deep dive into the ideas that shape the way we think and live. Stay sharp, stay powerful,